This movie-going experience is going to be pretty memorable for mainly two things. First up, nothing at all to do with Ghost in the Shell at all. Having to do more with a preview that I got before Ghost in the Shell. And you've probably seen the new preview for the remake of Stephen King's It, or at least the remake of the first part of Stephen King's It, focusing on the kids. There's not a huge crowd at Ghost in the Shell during this matinee. It's a couple of people just spaced out throughout the theater, and I'm just kind of sitting in my own aisle. The trailer for It starts to play, and if you're familiar with this trailer, it shows Billy making the paper boat for Georgie, his brother, who's gonna get killed by It. Sorry, spoilers, but I mean, that's kind of a given, even in the trailer. And this is the first time I'd seen the trailer, and so it's got Georgie floating his paper boat down, the sidewalk in the rainstorm, and it goes into the storm drain and such. Before it goes into the storm drain, though, he hits his head on this barrier, the do not cross, like little stand-up barrier, and falls down into the gutter. And I just laughed so hard and so loud when I saw that. It was just immediate, focus on the boat, goes down the gutter. Don't even see his reaction, you just see do not cross come up really quick, and you see him go thunk. And I know it's a little kid, I shouldn't be laughing, but it was so funny. It caught me so off guard. I was laughing so hard. Immediately, I see at least 3 sets of eyes turn around and look at me, almost accusatory, like, how dare you? I'm like, that's stupid. I felt like I was about to gesture like this, like, I'm sorry, but come on. He's so focused on this stupid little boat that he doesn't see this huge orange, wooden barrier in front of him. And I was trying to suppress chuckling any further. I was almost like this, where I was almost in tears laughing with just how abrupt and how out of nowhere that turn goes. Because the rest of the trailer does its typical horror movie jump scare, creepy music building up and so forth, and, referencing the original. They all float down here, Billy, and you will too. I almost laughed at that too. I'm sorry, I've never found it to be scary. I've read, parts of it at least, and some of the stuff that obviously didn't make it into the television version. The original televised miniseries thing, I never found scary. I found it kind of hilarious and adorable, and Tim Curry is a delight in that movie. I enjoy it for all the wrong reasons. I enjoy it for the reasons Stephen King probably doesn't want me to enjoy it as. He wants me to be genuinely terrified of it. I find it hilarious. So when I see this trailer and I see SS Georgie and I see what it's taking place in Derry, Maine, I'm like, oh, this is gonna be cute. They're gonna try to sell me on a modern day interpretation of Stephen King's It. That's probably, if it gets a hard R, I'll be really curious as to see what pushes it over the edge into hard R territory. Because I see this as a PG-13, honestly, and it probably will be, because it's got those little kids in it, and they're the focus of the film. I felt bad, but also very justified in my laughter at that point, because it's just so out of nowhere, and it just took me by surprise, and I couldn't help it. It's just that dark impulse in me in times that is just like, stupid kid. You deserve to get taken down to the sewers and killed by a clown. So that was highlight number 1 in this movie-going experience for me. Highlight number 2 for this viewing of Ghost in the Shell actually has to do with the movie. And I'm going to warn you up front, it does delve into some major spoiler territory, not just for Ghost in the Shell, but for Get Out, the Jordan Peele horror dark comedy thing that was out a couple of months ago. Now bear with me, when we get into that spoilerific territory, I'll let you know well ahead of time, but if you're still with me after that, I have a point. Ghost in the Shell, if you're going into it cold, without any familiarity with either the manga or the pre-existing anime or animated film that came out back in the mid-90s, if you're going into it without really any knowledge or any connection to those previous iterations, it's okay. It's perfectly fine. It's a perfectly serviceable action movie with cool visuals, reminiscent very much so of the best of the Matrix action sequences, which makes sense because the Matrix, more likely than not, ripped off action sequences from Ghost in the Shell originally, or ripped off concepts from Ghost in the Shell originally. So it makes sense that it would have a Matrix vibe to it, since it's the Matrix's granddaddy by all accounts, probably. Those work well. For the most part, the cast is really good in their roles. Juliette Binoche is really good in her supporting role, and I honestly thought there was going to be something going on more with her character. The way she was playing her relationship with Scarlett Johansson in this movie, I was anticipating a twist a little bit different from what actually happens, again, in the spoilerific territory. My familiarity with the franchise begins and ends essentially with this film. I own it, of course. I've watched it many, many times over the years. I really like it. I really appreciate its style and its animation. At times, yeah, the plot can get very, very, not to put too fine a point on it, but cerebral. You can maybe get a little lost in their philosophizing all over the place, but it serves its purpose very well. And the characters that they translated from this film into this westernized adaptation, the people do well. I like the guy they got for Batu. Honestly, I kind of wished he was in the movie a little bit more. Very kind of laid back, subdued, but there's a certain charm and smugness to him that I really appreciate. And when he works off of Scarlett Johansson in a couple of scenes, you get a feeling for their camaraderie, their brothers in arms type of camaraderie. Scarlett Johansson in this movie, I feel, is doing a fine enough job. She comes off a little too robotic, which would make sense for the character if it wasn't for the fact that the whole concept is she's a human brain put into a robotic shell. Her essence is human, but all the rest of her is cybernetics and mechanical. She comes off as very stiff at times and very wooden. I was wrestling with it a little bit during the viewing. Part of me felt like that's maybe what she really wanted to kind of accentuate was a detachment a little bit, because it opens up with her being created, essentially, kind of like the montage in the beginning of the original anime, with her going through the process of getting skin and muscle layers and all that. They basically recreate that almost, and as I was watching it, I was like, opening credits to Westworld, anybody? But then I'm thinking, you know what, Westworld probably lifted very liberally from Ghost in the Shell as well, so there you go. She does a fine enough job. Again, there's times she's just a little too wooden for me to be like, wait a minute, it's the other way around. She's not a robot trying to be human. She's a human in a robot. Then I was starting to think, okay, and then it picks up a year after she's been essentially put together, and she's doing missions, and you have no idea, like, really what training or what hardwiring has been done to her. And it's established in the movie that she's taking medication to kind of stabilize herself in this body. But as you find out later on in the movie, that serves kind of a double purpose, and explains a little bit of why she's acting the way she does. Why she, even though she is still human underneath all that, or she's supposed to be human underneath all of this, she is still very just kind of detached from everything and doesn't really have deep emotional reactions to things up until probably the very end of the movie. With what she has to do in the movie, I don't blame Scarlett Johansson for that necessarily. I feel like that was very much a writer and filmmaker choice there, that she portray a little bit more stiffly than the other characters, because she is a little, detached, and it's a little alien almost. But I feel that's perfectly fine to suit the character. She's still very good in the action scenes, I feel. When she has to be tough, I buy it. There is some questionable CGI here and there in the film, but when it's just hand-to-hand fighting or just shootouts with guns, I buy her assertiveness in those scenarios. Like, she's not like quivering or shaking as she's holding the gun. She does look intimidating. There's this point where she breaks into Juliette Binoche's apartment and is just looming over her, just like staring down at her, and she doesn't flinch for about a good 30 seconds. Even as Juliette Binoche is like getting up out of her bed and is like surprised to see her there. And when she does flinch, like, you buy Julia Binoche like recoils in terror. And for the world that they established in this movie, it's a really colorful world. I didn't go see the 3D screening of it, but I imagine if you did see it in 3D, there would be plenty of stuff to captivate you, to hold your focus, because you've seen it before in other movies like Blade Runner, or in shows kind of like Firefly, where you take a hodgepodge of what Eastern and Western cultural influences and just mix them together. That's essentially what this is. It isn't quintessential like, oh, this is what Neo-Tokyo or whatever would look like. It's a little bit of everything. You've got people mixed in from all kinds of different races and creeds, but you have this overwhelmingly Asian aesthetic working for it. This gets into the spoilerific part of the review, so I'm just giving you a heads up here. I was perfectly willing to let go of all the whitewashings back and forth that had been going on before this movie was released. When it was first announced that Scarlett Johansson was going to be playing the Major, I was a little kind of conflicted about that when I first heard the news, because, well, to start off with, not even factoring in the race angle at all, I just felt like this was a story that didn't need a live-action interpretation. Like, for all the talk they have about Keanu Reeves wanting to do Cowboy Bebop and things of that nature, those are things I just feel don't need live-action interpretations. Now, are there franchises that have been in cartoon format before that I like their live-action interpretations? Of course, the original Ninja Turtles. I like what they did with that. To a lesser extent, you know, some of this more recent superhero stuff. You could argue that they started off in some cartoon format beforehand and then they became live-action, and some of that's worked well, some of it not so much. Where the identity, I felt, of this story and of its themes was rooted very heavily in Japanese and Asian animation and culture. I was definitely one of those people who was very trepidatious about, alright, well, okay, how are we gonna whiten this up? I guess. But I wasn't gonna not see it. I was curious enough. And when the more I saw of like trailers and things like that, the more I became a little more accepting of it, because, again, what I said about the aesthetic of the city and the characters is that they're not going for the purely Asian aesthetic. They're mixing and matching so many different races and cultures in here that it all supports the thesis of a Scarlett Johansson lead in this role that has been traditionally Major Motoko Kusanagi. I hope I said that right. So going into it, I instantly let that go, because the story just clips along in its own thing. It never calls to attention the whitewashing and stuff like that in the first 2/3 of the movie. You're along for the ride up until, again, spoilers, 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 up until the reveal in the beginning of the third act, where you find out that the Major is actually a Japanese teenage girl's brain in a Caucasian robot body. And I'm not mad about that reveal. I'm not, I'm not into that full SJW, like, oh my gosh, sacrilege, burn them type thing. It's unintentionally hilarious, because I immediately started drawing up comparisons, and again, spoilers again, to Get Out, a movie I'd seen a month prior, which has a similar theme in its reveal of transferring the consciousness of one person from a certain ethnicity into the body of another ethnicity. And here, how the parallel works is that I buy more the legitimacy of Get Out's gimmick, or use of that gimmick. It's meant to be dark, slightly comedic, but very satirical, and very demented. It's meant to be uncomfortable when you find out that happens in the movie. That's what is going on in that neighborhood. You know, it might take you by surprise, but when it does, you're like, oh, whoa, that is messed up. And it funnels it more into how you should feel unsettled by that film. That film is meant to be kind of unsettling in that regard. Here, when it's revealed to her that she used to be this Japanese teen runaway named Motoko, yeah, and that the main guy, the main bad guy, or the guy who's the antagonist for about, again, 2/3 of the movie, turns out to be one of her long-lost buddies named Kadeo. And they're both in these Caucasian robot bodies. That didn't read as something that should occur in this particular version of the story. Like I said, I was perfectly willing to just let go of the fact that this is originally something from Japan and just immerse myself in, okay, it's this melting pot of cultures and they just happen to have a lot of Asian influence, and here's just a robot girl trying to do the right thing for herself and find out her identity amidst all that. And I know why it's put in there, because that is the character's actual name, it's revealed, is Motoko, even though she just goes by the Major for majority of the film. It feels more like that's done to appease the diehard fans than it is to feel like a natural part of the story. And that's why I'm still disturbed by the use of this particular theme in something like Get Out. Like, that still is kind of haunting, but in something like this, it's unintentionally hilarious. And again, I'm not like furious about it, but it feels so badly placed and mishandled here that it felt like Rupert Sanders was really like, we're getting a lot of flack for casting ScarJo. Maybe we should throw the fans a bone and just say, underneath all this, she's still the Japanese girl you all know from the original. It just feels wildly out of place. You could have come across a revelation about who Scarlett Johansson as the Major would have been in this universe without throwing that bone in there, because it doesn't serve anything really in the end. She ends up like meeting her mom, who is Japanese, and maybe you could have just left it there. If they had just left the scene there where she revisits her old home and, you know, the cat instantly recognizes it as her, and then she sits down and talks with the woman she kind of finds out is her mother. If you'd left that more up in the air, more ambiguous, and that she'd never return to her mom, because it has to happy ending it, essentially. I would have been okay. Granted, when that happens in the movie, I was kind of sitting there like raising my eyebrow going like, are we really going to do this? We're really going to do this, Scarlett? All right, I'm still here. We'll go for it. The scene happens and I'm willing to just be like, okay, cool. Maybe they'll just leave it at that. Maybe she's kind of become resolved with who she is and her identity, and we can move on to the closing part of the movie. But then they have to tack on this happy ending where Scarlett Johansson visits her own grave that has her actual Japanese name on there. And then she goes over to her mom who's waiting for her and gives her a big hug, and she's like, you don't need to visit here anymore, everything's fine. It didn't feel organic in this movie. It really felt like kind of an apology that the filmmakers threw in there to kind of say, we understand your concerns. We understand your concerns, here you go. And I don't feel like that's an actual apology. And I don't feel like it's an apology that was needed, because if you'd not put that in there, if you'd gone another way with kind of the reveal of who she was originally, or best yet, maybe don't reveal who she was originally. Keep her as this mysterious lone hero type figure that you're not supposed to know every little facet of, maybe. Leave a little bit of ambiguity as to who she is and have her find some peace of mind or some closure in another way. The fact that they threw that in there, it did feel really thrown in, at least to me. And again, that's just because I know at least the original movie. While this does have several scenes and influences and in a way, shape, or form kind of follows the plot a little bit with some big deviations, of course. It was carving out its own identity for a good majority of the film. Like, I wasn't really thinking back unless an iconic scene came up, like when she's fighting the dude in the standing water and she's in camouflage mode, and when the guy finds out he's had his whole memory erased and rewritten. That's lifted from the original film, of course. When she, you know, scenes where she's dropping off the building and dropping into camouflage mode, even though it's in a completely different context and for a completely different action sequence, you recognize the influence from the anime, at least. I was perfectly willing to let the comparisons go because I was actually, you know, perfectly okay with whatever story they were following. It's very run-of-the-mill and generic, but it was nothing really out there like batshit to that point. I was along for the ride with this film up until that reveal. And then I'm like, oh guys, come on, we don't have to talk about this. The movie was okay. The movie was chugging along just fine. That being said, would I recommend this movie? Probably as a rental, unless you are really interested in seeing what this looks like in 3D. Because like I said, the spectacle of it, at least in the 2D screening, was still impressive. I can only imagine what the 3D would be like. Am I curious enough to go see it again in 3D? Probably not, just because now that I know kind of what's coming. But again, I went into it with some kind of foreknowledge of this, or one of the original interpretations. If you're going into this movie cold, you might have a good time with it. It's not one of the worst movies I've seen yet. It's definitely not one of the best of. I don't think I'm gonna be putting this on my top 10 of 2017. It's there. It's perfectly serviceable for what it needs to do. It's just got that one aspect that feels wildly unnecessary and unintentionally hilarious. Like I said, something like that in a movie like Get Out, which is building up to, that's the whole point of that reveal. The whole movie is designed to build up to this shocking and very disturbing reveal when it comes to, here's what they've been doing with all the black people. Yeah, that's earned. That's a legitimate, kind of use of that. Here, where it really did feel like just an apology for people who viewed it as whitewashing, makes it come off a little bit more so like whitewashing unintentionally, maybe. Because now they're just saying yeah, she's a Japanese girl underneath all that. We just gave her a white girl's body because, I don't know, white girl tested better in the marketing? The more I just think about it, the more kind of, again, unnecessary and unintentionally funny it is to me. But again, that's just my weird sensibilities. It's not a god-awful film, but it's not a great film either. It's serviceable. It's there. Make of it what you will. Sorry if I spoiled. At least I feel bad if I spoiled Get Out for you a little bit, but go see Get Out. Get Out does this kind of twist way better, and the twist is actually supposed to be part of the story and not just some throwaway little bit of fan service to diehards who might be a modicum of butthurt over the fact that it's a Caucasian lady in the lead. I don't really have anything else to say about this. Happy April Fools, everybody. This is the best April Fool's Day prank for movies I could think of for myself. I can't wait to laugh out loud at Stephen King's It.